Hello all. So there are some questions coming on the assignment that we see a lot. So let's have a look at one of those. First, big problem that many students have is what to do with these to-dos. So you have to think about what to do here, not just, okay, I'm just going to do as quick as possible to do this. The tests may not give you that much of an explanation about how this works. So think, look back, what is the purpose of this property in this case? Then there is the idea about overriding properties. So that is not so much for boxes and lines here, but for inbox, when we go there, we can find, for example, owning player here. Owning player means that we need to somehow have a way of getting the owning player of a box. Yes, there is a get implementation here. We don't actually need that. As the comment says, you can make this into a var. So you can override a val to become a var and just store it here. It's not required. The interface, when we go back to the interface definition, it says, okay, we need to be able to get a player. If you decide to implement that by just storing that, that is perfectly valid. So if we do this, then we have a property, and then you could implement this by field. But obviously that wouldn't allow us to change this. Okay, it says, so yes, after we use field, here we have a backing field. We want to change this, so we can set var, and this function, this getter here, is completely useless because it's exactly what normally happens. You can use this if you want to kind of say, okay, I want to know that someone checked my player, but normally we don't care. And that is different from these bounding lines, for example. These bounding lines, you could store them, but you don't have any need to because you can also look them up. This is where you need to calculate, okay, this is the box coordinates. What are the line coordinates that belong to this? Don't forget to use a debugger because there's a good way you can get lost with that. And if you, like yesterday, I helped someone with a problem with lines, and what ended up was that he was trying to look the bounding lines for a line that was not actually a valid line. So, how to do lines for our game. So that's the game. So one of the things that you may have seen also, some the example. So I use student box here rather than the abstract thing.box. Sometimes it's nice to get the actual type here, so I put that. One question is, how do we initialize these? So yes, you can use array mutable box or mutable matrix, but that is not necessarily the best way of doing it. So what I have done for you is created a constructor function for both matrix and sparse matrix. So you can use mutable matrix of student box. And of course we need sizes. So what's the size? Well, this is something that you can get into through your constructor. We didn't have that in our constructor, so we would need to do that, but we'd say something like width or height. And there's the initialization. And so we need a function that takes an x and a y coordinate and then creates a student box. You know what? This actually matches exactly the student box's constructor. So we can just refer to that function and don't need to implement that ourselves. We still have width and height not working. So what do? So we can add it here. We can do this easier. Create parameter width. And the width is not a unit, it is an int. You can create it, put it into a val. We don't actually need that here, because we could always ask it from the boxes matrix what the width is. So we can, while we are here, we can also add height, which is also an int, and add both to the type or the constructor. So now we see that it has turned up here. So you can actually do this quicker than by typing it up there. Either way works. There's no real difference. Again, we can leave out the student box here because it's implied and it is visible in the parameters of the type, so of the property. So this is how you can create this. There's one snatch when we do this student line matrix. So we need a mutable sparse matrix, and that is that it has a default implementation for the validation function. But if you do that, then you will not, the default implementation, you say everything is fine. So it works like exactly like a regular matrix. But we want to do this, we want to use our coordinate system. So please, please, please keep a look at your drawing of your coordinate system. So we want to say something like, okay, how wide is this? We have width was in boxes, remember that, so we need width +1. And how high is this? Well, we have height times 2, because we've got the top line, the vertical lines, and the bottom line, but the bottom line is shared with the box below it. So what we do is we just see top sides and then to the bottom, and then we add one for the bottom line that is not shared. There's only one line that's not shared. So, and again, how do we create that? We can pass in student line here, and now we need this validate function. So we need something that takes an x and a y, or a column and a row, whatever you find the easiest way to think about this, and returns a boolean. So what we can do is do true. That should shut up the red squigglies, but it doesn't solve the problem of skipping out an element. So when is it true? Well, the top rows, if we have an odd line, then we are always on a vertical. So then we have the complete sizes. So when is it true? Height divided by 2 equals 1. Or if it's not the last, so if it's not the last line, then we can also do that. So for you it's this one. So what we can do is say, okay, x is smaller than width. Now we need to think, okay, so if we have a 5 by 5 matrix, then the width would be 5. The last index of a horizontal line would be 4. Yes, that would be correct. Whereas the matrix would allow 5 as an index as well, because the width of the matrix is that. So this should work correctly. Again, the test will pick this up very quickly and tell you, okay, this is not a valid coordinate, this is a valid coordinate, etc. So the test can be a bit tricky because they are really pedantic, but they help you with getting everything correct. So this is what we do. That's all we need for having our matrix, but we need to remember to add this validation function so that we know which elements are allowed and which ones are not. So remember, when we have properties, you can override. So the current player, again, we could just store the current player. In this particular thing, the way I would implement that would be, like I said here, keep an index. So what do you do? How do you do that? Well, private var current player index int equals 0. How you get the current player then? Well, that's very easy, isn't it? So players current player index, and that is all. So that's how you do this. If you want to do it in actually store the current player rather than use an index, you could store that, but it's easier to work with integers rather than with random objects. And as an A side, you don't need any specialization of player for human players. Only for computer players you want to specialize that, because the default one doesn't have any intelligence in it. So you want to do something that does something. You can do a random player. You can just ask all the lines, filter it by the ones that haven't been drawn yet, and then pick one randomly. There is a list.random, and that sort of just picks a random element out of a list. So that should be fairly straightforward for everyone. Okay. So these were some of the tips for your assignments, and hopefully that will help you on your way.